Hello YouTube. Today, in the spirit of the video I made about ancient Greece, I want to continue this series with a different area of the world and a different time period, because I had a lot of fun making that video and you guys liked it as well. And so I believe that it could be very interesting to explore different cultures and different, all the pockets of time where ancient men left us with a legacy of knowledge that is applicable to our life, even in these modern times. And so today I want to explore Japan, but not any time period in Japan. We're going to go back to the time of the samurai. And that's actually, quite large. There's not just 1 or 2 years that they had a feudal system. It's actually the vast majority of their history. So instead of being a little bit too spread out, I wanted to focus on a particular figure today, a man that I personally respect greatly and I had learned a lot of things throughout my life from, and I think that you can beneficiate from listening to his words as well. And that man is Miyamoto Musashi, the author of the Book of Five Rings. So if last time the topic was more about discussing ancient Greek myths, today I want to be more focused because we're going to actually take the knowledge directly from his book. And you're going to see that if the Greeks, who already back in the days lifted weights, had some great wisdom to give to us, in this case, the applicability of the advice is sometimes so strong and the carryover is so immediate that it's a little bit eerie. It's a little bit hard to fathom that someone whose life pursuit was becoming the greatest samurai of all time could be so on the money when it came to actually giving advice to lifters. So let us explore today the great wisdom of Miyamoto Musashi and see what the samurais have to teach us in terms of general wisdom for personality but also our training. So the first thing I wanted to discuss with you guys is the person that was Miyamoto Musashi, because he's part legend, part historical figure. Some people say that he was greatly over-exaggerated. Some people say that he was actually a sort of living demigod that had so many crazy feats of strength that at some point it's true that it could be easy to doubt them and say that it's not possible for a human being to actually be this potent and this lethal. Because this guy was essentially the perfect warrior. If you want to create someone and plug them on the earth that is going to be the most dangerous and the most martial, that's Miyamoto Musashi. That guy already existed and he's long gone. But thankfully for us, he left us writings because he wasn't just a warrior, he was also an intellectual. But not in the sense that most people who are intellectuals nowadays are. He wasn't a Poindexter sitting at his desk 5 hours a day. Instead, most of his knowledge he gained via fighting and training, and at a later period in his life, he decided that it was very important for him to put it down. But even then, even when he sort of traded the sword for the pen, you could still tell that he couldn't shed his warrior skin. He still talks like a warrior, and I find it refreshing. So in his life, he started training when he was 13, and he was training arduously until he was 28, 29, but he kept training until he died. And that to me is already very inspiring. It's something that I want to do personally. I know that I'm going to have a physical prime. I haven't entered it yet, but we all have. The idea that you can be at your top level all throughout your life into your 80s is a pipe dream. But the possibility that we all have to stay active and stay, in a sense, physically dominant, that is in the cards for every single person on earth. And that's something that he did. He exemplified, because his life ended when his training ended and not the other way around. And to me, this is already something we need to look at and appreciate, because he spent his entire life trying to improve himself. But even though he is considered as a living legend, and back in the days he already was, his contemporaries looked at him as a demigod, as I said, he still never really developed the type of, peculiar mindset that you see a lot of people who are gifted or who make it and have fame try to spew onto their disciples, or they try to make you believe that they were born different and born special. Musashi recognized the importance of talent. He knew that some people are born gifted, but he also made sure to tell people that in his mind, anyone who decides to follow the way can make their ability known, and they can be better than people who don't train. And that to me is very important, because many people think that if you want to start, or if you have to start, you need to have something special. And the problem is that you might have that something special, but because it's not evident and revealed immediately in 2 months of training, you're going to persuade yourself that you're mediocre, or that you shouldn't even waste your time into this practice or doing it. And so you will never actually reveal your potential. And this is something that Musashi warned us against. You must train, and you must always believe in your ability and potential, because this is how you actually manage to pull it out. It's inside you, and you need to actually be the one who digs. It's not going to be evident to the naked eye the first second you do a push-up. You need to actually train for a long time. He also said, and that to me is also marking, that he has lived his life without following any particular way. And that's interesting, because you could think that someone so dedicated and gifted would have a one-track mind in a sense. And a one-track mind is very important. In bodybuilding, for example, you can't just diversify and try to be good everywhere, or else you won't be good anywhere. That's not what he means here. What he means is that he always refused to be put into a particular spot, or to be, imprisoned into a particular dogma. He always kept his spirit open, and he always looked around him. He never had tunnel vision. And some people preach tunnel vision, but the problem with tunnel vision is that it's only good if you're going in the right direction. If you're not, you're going to waste your time. You're going to go down a path that you didn't really want to explore in the first place. And that is damaging. So let us learn about the true methods of Musashi and the things that he left for us, right? After this speech where he's basically telling us that everyone can train, as he started when he was 13 and did it his entire life, and he has lived without following any particular way, he also did all of that without a teacher. And that is also interesting, because I personally teach you on this channel. And so with what Musashi just said, you could tell yourself, well, in that case, I must leave, right? Because you are impeding my ability to progress. And that's not what he means. What he means rather is that you must not let yourself become owned by the teacher. Because too many people on YouTube Fitness are like this. They take advice from someone, and that person becomes their god, and they link their development, their physical evolution and journey with that person. And that is when it becomes dangerous. The knowledge you get from the teacher is to beneficiate you. But the second it ties you down to the person, that is when the link becomes poisonous, and you must cut these ties. Because you are your own teacher, and the person who can teach you the most is you. Not me and not anyone else. And Musashi understood that from a very young age. And so as he aged and he became technically a teacher, he also made sure to always warn his students about that derivative practice of scholarly applicants who tend to transform their disciples into slaves. Your teacher must give you wings, not clip them. And once the wings are spread and you don't need the teacher anymore, you go and you do your own thing. But even throughout your learning years, always keep your eyes open. You can teach yourself a lot of this wood by just being observant. And everything in this book that I also recommend you read, right? It's the Book of 5 Rings, is coming from his own experience. And anyone can do the same with their own method, because we are all different. And even though we'll have the same ability to access potential, the potential will not always be the same, and the way to tap into it is not always the same as well. And that's also very applicable to us, because how many times have you heard someone tell you that this method is the best and it's the only method? No, that's not true. There are broad areas of development and of programming, for example, that are correct across the board, but they're broad. So you can fluctuate on it, and you might find that one of the lanes within that broad pathway is going to be the most beneficial for you. something that someone thousands of years ago had already understood, but that we're still dealing with, because we're still dealing with dogma in the fitness community. It never really goes away. And so it's up to you to push that dogma and not let it inside your life, because it can do a lot of damage. And talking about that also begs the question of comparison, because the first thing you would think of when you hear about Miyamoto Musashi is you would try to compare your life with his, because he killed his first man when he was 13. He won his first duels when he was a preteen. When you were a preteen, you were playing Pokemon, and I was as well, or maybe PS1, whatever game you were playing. We certainly were not at that level of manliness, and that is because we're just the fruits of our period. We're just the result of that modern lifestyle which softens men. That being said, it could also be said that it's fairly good and comfortable that we didn't have to kill people to survive when we were 15, but between that very rough life and the life that we lead, there is a middle ground, and I think that we are too soft. They might have been too tough and harsh back in the days, but we went way overboard with the cushiness and the softness, and it's up to us to regain some of that difficulty, some of that discomfort that actually is going to mold us into the person that we must be. But that doesn't mean that we must rush, and that is very important. There is a quote that I really like from Musashi. He goes, "The biggest mistake you can make as a trainee is to try to hasten the blooming of the flower." And back in the days, again, he describes that as the scourge of his epoch, of the scores, the kendo scores, the teachers, the way of the sword. All of that was already poisoned by that, where the teachers, out of ego, tried to make their students as good as possible, as quickly as possible, and they hastened the blooming of the flower, regardless of the ability of the flower to continue growing. If you're interested in l'horticulture, which is the art of taking care of flowers, some flowers you want to slow down their growth, because if they bloom too quickly, they might be fully open and vulnerable at a time period where it's too cold and harsh outside for them to survive, and then they die. And the flower that took more time to actually bloom would have survived that, because one, the growth of the flower was more resilient because it took more resources and more time, and also it bloomed at the right moment. The timing was perfect. And so, as you are a flower as well, you must retain that and remember that throughout your training journey. Do not push yourself towards progression if you know it's not sustainable or you're going to end up occurring injuries. There is really no point. But the reason why you do that is because you constantly compare yourself with other people. You look at their flowers and you tell yourself, oh, they're so much bigger, they're so much more colorful than I am. I must find a way to compete with them at any cost. Let me take a quick break. So as I was saying, with the blooming of the flower, you must concern yourself with your own growth and disregard other people. Because in reality, looking at them does nothing for you, it only hurts you. If you can gain some traction because you're competitive, that's a good thing. But always think about your own growth and the scheduling and timing of it, because it's extremely important, and it's something that he understood as well. He was an early bloomer at 13, but we are not all like this. I started training when I was 15, but I really bloomed when I was 20, 21. For some people, it's going to be faster. Some you're going to start later in life. All of that is completely useless to look at as something that makes you of value or not. What matters is what your flower looks like at the end. And if it takes 20, 30 years, doesn't matter. Okay, the final blooming is what we must pay attention to. And so, with that same mindset, the way you go about it, about your growth, is also important, because, according to Musashi, immature strategy is the cause of grief. And that is true across the board in life, but it's especially true in training. Many people, when they start, they approach training with a less than optimal methodology, and that's perfectly normal. But some retain that for the rest of their journey, where they never really evolve. their physique will evolve, but their methods and their mindset and intelligence never really goes anywhere. And that is a problem, because this is the best way to go nowhere, of course. Because when the spiritual stagnates, you understand also that the body cannot follow. The body responds to the stimulus, but the stimulus is planned via the brain. So in reality, a lot of people think the limiting factor is their muscles and their genetics, when in reality it's here. It's their brain, not that they're stupid, but that they're immature. They refuse to actually evolve in terms of strategy. And you must strategize, because you're essentially waging a war. You're waging a war against a modern world that is simply not created and thought out to let you be anabolic or muscular. This world is the exact opposite. It's supposed to make you soft. Everything is planned to make you as vulnerable and as malleable as possible. And so to be rock hard and to actually develop the body and its physical abilities will take some planning on your part. I do believe that back in the days, the biggest issue was to avoid an early death, but to us, it's the same but on a different level. They try to avoid an early physical death, we must avoid an early spiritual death. The death that could occur if you just let your spirits vanish into the nothingness and the endless rejection of the actual worthy values that would make you a better man, a happier man. That is what we combat, us modern men in this world. And that is your spiritual development. And the only way to do that is to practice. Throughout the book, if you read the book, you will be shocked by the amount of time Musashi repeats the same sentence. He constantly goes, you must train. It's like a mantra, it's everywhere, it's like a punctuation in a sense. And the reason why he does that is because it's the most important advice that you can hear. You must train. If you lose sight of that reality, all of the rest is completely useless, because you must put into practice what you learn. And how do you do that? You train. When? Always. Why? Because you must train, okay? Integrate that, and it's going to make your life so much easier. Every single problem of your life can be solved via that mindset. So that is mostly for the approach to training and the lifting wisdom that the samurai also are passing down to us. But you're going to see that it gets even more concrete than that. Because beyond that, he also touches on certain particular aspects of training that I find interesting. For example, the capacity and ability that you must develop of having a broad view. As he preaches to make small things into big things. What does that mean exactly? It means that with this much knowledge, you must be able to turn it into this much. And that in life and in training will save you a lot of time, and it will also save you from making mistakes. Smart people are able to look at other people and look at their mistakes and their errors and correct the way they're going to act before the mistake even occurred. That is a certain level of enlightenment in a sense and awareness. But I have found that having that ability in your own life can sometimes be even tougher, because you lack objectivity, and you might repeat the same mistakes again and again because it's always happening to you. Your ego might be, playing a role, or you might not want to see the reality of the situation for what it is. And so the only way to save yourself from that is to be able to go from your small view of just your physical person and the perception of the world you have, and extrapolate yourself and look at yourself from the outside, like an out-of-body experience, and look at it objectively, like you're a clinical case, and think, okay, I'm detached emotionally from that person. What is going on here? And if you have that ability, you're going to see that you're going to be much more objective and much more rational, and it's going to, again, allow you to take good decisions. But more importantly than that, there is a philosophical teaching here. As I said, Musashi tells you to train all the time, that you must train. Another thing he said in the book that marked me for life was that from one thing, you are able to know 10,000 things. So again, from a small thing, you can inflate that into something much bigger. And it sounds unapplicable until you actually try. And until you actually realize that men like Musashi, men of the past, had to do that constantly. They had to make their own experience and build their own knowledge from very small things. Like, for example, the first scientists who discovered things, no one was there to tell them that this was the big thing that they must discover at the end. They started from this, from a tiny thing. Look at the discovery of penicillin. It started from studying mushrooms. And then it evolved into that massive discovery that has helped humanity throughout the times. For us, it's the same thing. But the problem is that we have so much knowledge and information available that you don't really have to do that. Because every single time you want to know something, you can just Google it, or you go on the internet, and there it is, the grand big thing. But do you know what that does to you? It makes you incapable of looking at the small aspects of the thing. You see the result at the end, but you don't see the journey that led you to the result, and you're missing out because the actual importance is in the small things. And the equation, not the results, right? The formula and the equation are important. The results don't really matter. It's the reason why your math teacher always took out points. If you couldn't prove that you knew how to get to the result, it's because it's not what matters. You must have the ability to actually get down to it. And so to do that, you must make from one thing 10,000 things. Do it in lifting as well. I have many people sometimes, and I know that they don't mean anything by it, but I'm always a little bit taken aback because I have people who say, okay, so here you said this, and I would want to apply that to this aspect. Could you tell me how? And yes, I can, because I know, I'm teaching you, so I know, but you can as well, because that's how I did it. For me to go from that point to that point, I just went from one thing to a bigger thing. You have that ability as well. When people ask me, okay, how do I modify that program? I know you know how. It's just that you're afraid. Because if you are to infer knowledge from smaller things, you must also take a risk because you could be wrong. But guess what? If you always refuse to be wrong, you're never going to actually train that skill and you'll always remain wrong. Try your luck. Try it out. Again, if from one thing you make 10,000 things, how many of those 10,000 are going to be correct? Not many, but some will. And the more you do it, the more of them will be because you're going to develop your judgment. So you must absolutely try it out. Trust yourself and make your own knowledge. Stop waiting for people to feed you like a baby bird because you don't know the guy. You don't know me. You don't know if I'm not going to feed you anything poisonous or not because you didn't even really develop the taste and the ability to actually feel the poison because you know, again, nothing. And I have many people who tell me and who complain about that and say, I don't know who to believe. You don't know who to believe because you never developed your ability to be judgmental and to actually test the waters and decide if the information is good or not. You must do that, just not only for yourself, but for your ability to be taught. Because I can't teach someone who cannot teach themselves. And across the board in life, that is very true. So make that a part of your life, like your training. And treat your training as part of said life, with your spirit unchanged. Very important. This is something that Musashi preached. When he trained, he didn't hype up, he didn't make it anything special, he just went into his dojo and he trained. And the reason for that is, I have found that yes, making training that big, exciting thing is good, it feels good, but it's not sustainable because big events in our lives are big because they happen rarely. And the type of people that have that hyped up relationship with training tend to have a tough time being consistent because one, it's very demanding in terms of adrenaline and resources, and two, in your brain you have made that into a particular special event. So how do you expect to do that every single day or 5 times a week throughout the years? It's not possible. You sabotage yourself. So you must approach it as a part of your life. And guess what? When training becomes a part of your life, you don't skip anymore. I don't even remember the last time I skipped training because I don't skip life. It's like if you ask me, hey, do you skip your job or your lunch or sometimes do you skip sleep? No, it's part of life. Training is part of life. I don't skip it because it's nothing special. It's just another day. I love it with my whole heart, but the scheduling of it is nothing out of the ordinary for me, and it shouldn't be for you either. And when I approach it, my spirit is there. If I must increase my spirit, it's going to be in times of hardship when I must push the weight. But when I get started, I'm not. I'm calm. I'm just getting through the motion. I'm warming up. Once I'm warm, now I can get into the actual mode, the correct energy. And I guarantee you that Musashi, who killed many men in his time, was the same way. He was most likely a tame animal in his training, but when it mattered, he was an actual beast of a man. And you can only truly unleash the beast if the rest of the time you are calm. That's also the problem with always being out of your mind hyped. And that is the way you're going to be on the way, on the path towards your dream, the path of physical development. But that path can become treacherous because to all way there are sidetracks. And that is very true. It's what I said with the tunnel vision thing. You're on the path and that's great and all, but the problem of the path is that once you walk on it, you start to develop a tendency to stop paying attention because it's something that becomes repetitive, and again, you made it part of your life, so it's normal. And that means that for some people, you are going to go down a path you didn't really want to follow because, again, you stopped paying attention, you went through the motion. There is a difference between being sort of at a baseline with your practice and your ability to train and not paying attention. It's not the same thing. You must constantly check yourself and see where you're going. And the only way for that to be effective is to actually know where you're going. If you again look at the video I made about the Greeks, those heroes of old, they had a goal, or a goal was imposed on them via tasks like Hercules, but at no point did they just wing it. Like Jason didn't leave his town on a boat to go nowhere. He knew exactly where he was going. He didn't know the path, he didn't know the way, and he was just sent left and right by the gods and abused in a sense. But he had a clear goal in mind. And the path is like this. You're not going to be able to pick your journey. You're not going to be able to pick your actual path. But you can pick the destination. You can decide where you want to go. After that, it's up to you to maintain cap and to not lose sight of what you want. And the problem is that I know that many of you, it happened to you, it happens to many lifters. You spend maybe 6 months, maybe a year, maybe longer than that, doing something in the gym, but you don't really know why. You're just, again, doing it because it's training and it's part of your regimen and you like it. It still feels good. But you don't feel as excited as you should, at least in terms of the purpose, because you don't really have one. And the problem when you don't have a purpose is that your spirit has started to diverge. And that can lead to a lot of disappointment because you could realize at some point that, hey, I just spent so much energy and I'm nowhere near what I want to be. And that's because you're walking in the wrong direction. Just because you're on the path doesn't mean that you're going towards where you want to go. So you must always ask yourself, why am I doing this? What is the point of this? And if I have no answer to that, am I going in the right direction? Am I still walking towards where I want to go? A lot of people find it scary to have that conversation with themselves because they think, okay, what if the answer is no? What if I realize that I don't really know where I'm going? Now I'm going to have lost all of that time. Well, tell you what, if you don't have that conversation now, you're going to be forced to have it at some point. And it's better to realize now that you can actually turn and actually go back on your tracks and save that time instead of having it being pushed on you at some point by life, because life will remind you at some point that you're wasting your time. And that is much more dangerous and much more difficult because now it's not your own agency that saved you, it's happenstance. It's tougher to deal with, I guarantee you that. And once you know that, once you understand that you must be on the way and you must pay attention on where you're going to develop a knowledge and an understanding of the way. And according to Musashi, if you know the way broadly, you will see it in everything. And for us, the way is lifting. And I'm sure that you know what I'm talking about because when you lift for a long time, you end up thinking about it all the time and you end up applying it to your life. Like for example, when I see a guy picking up a box, first thing I think is, oh, he's lifting it terribly. Or I see a guy and I catch a glimpse of his arms and I'm like, oh, he has good insertions on his forearms. I'm constantly obsessed with it, and because of it, I see it everywhere. Everything is lifting. and lifting has become the solution to everything in life. And so at this point, it's when you have become so engrossed with lifting that you are a part of it and it is a part of you. And to me, once you reach that stage, you are, one, a certified lifter, and two, you are never going to quit. Because now it's part of your identity. And this is very important because once you're at that moment, you are certain that you're going to keep progressing forever. And I'm sure that Musashi was the same. If you read his book, sometimes you're like, I'm glad he wasn't living in today's world, because he would walk around the subway looking at people thinking, he has like a knife, like I could cut his neck like this, like in one slice, or oh, the way that person carries his umbrella, he should carry it like this because it would be easier to just take it out. He would be a menace in today's world. But for us lifters, it just makes us quirky and weird, but that's also how you recognize other lifters usually. And in that endeavor of being on the way and knowing the way, you should also understand that it's something you do for you by your own means. Just like with what he said about being a teacher, a self-taught student, you should always not copy others, because if you copy others, you're going to start working on their way, on their path, and the chances of that making you feel fulfilled is 0%. So not only are you not going the right way, you're not even on the right path. The path doesn't have your name on it. You're walking someone else's path. And that's very common on YouTube for people who copy YouTubers they like. And the problem is that not only, again, are you just being a copycat and mimicking someone else, but that person is most likely to be much more advanced on the path. And knowing most YouTubers, they also make you feel bad about being so far behind them. And they're also going to start to make you believe that you can never reach their level on the path. So it's a triple whammy of shittiness that is going to lead to you making no gains. And that is something that Musashi most likely also was very opposed to in his lifetime. And so he warns us against that. Because in everything in life, there is the action and then there is the background. And the background for us is everything that surrounds lifting, but is not lifting. For example, your recovery, your diet, the interaction you have with others, the type of knowledge that you consume, the type of research that you go through. All of that is your background. And in that background exists a timing, just like in your action. Everything in life has a timing. And Musashi was big on timings because he explains to you that even if the action is good, the timing of it could be bad, and that makes the entire thing bad. Just like with the blooming of the flower. A flower blooming is always a good thing, but not if it's not timed properly. So think about all of what you do constantly and think about the timing. If you look at history, history is a succession of timings. And usually the things that we remember, the heroes, the acts that inspire us had perfect timing. You have the ability to have that as well because everything in your training is under your control. And so your timing can be as perfect as you want it to be as long as you're actually dedicated to it and you pay attention. Many people don't pay attention to their timing, but it's quite important. Because as you practice, your spirit broadens. And the more the spirit broadens, the more you're going to start seeing lifting everywhere and the more you're going to also see timings. Timings are going to appear more and more apparent. But the interesting thing is that again, the very idea of training is not just presented as developing your muscles. It's more than that. It's an intellectual pursuit. And that is what makes it beautiful to me. Lifting, if it were just curling weight and grunting and then going home and eating steak, it would be boring. I would have quit a long time ago. What is so important and what keeps me and many people going is the intricate thought that you start to develop about it when you're done with your lifting and grunting, because I lift weights 2 hours, 3 hours a day, but I'm awake and alive much more than that. So what happens in my brain during that time? Well, that's part of the background that I just described, and it's an important part of your lifting journey. Some would say even more important. And so, for you to be able to enjoy it as much as you can, you must let your spirit broaden as you lift. Many people do the opposite. The more they lift, the more their spirit becomes tight, it becomes constricted, because they start to zero in on the small aspect of lifting that they practice, and they regard everything else as void and null and non-applicable. And it's good, again, to pay attention to your way and to where you're going on the path. But again, if you end up with tunnel vision like this, you are bound to get lost. You must broaden. It doesn't mean that you're going to be Mr. Everything and touch everything, but at least your spirit will be. You will have a broad understanding and knowledge of everything, because you're walking on the path, and you might think that the path is like this, but it's not. It's infinitely large. And the more of an ability you have to see that, the more of a freedom you get on said path, and that is true also in life. The more intelligent you become, in my opinion, the less dogmatic. Not that you become, again, Mr. Tolerance, but that you have the ability to understand concepts that contradict your current view of life, because they might actually represent a better option down the line. And in terms of applicability to your training, that means that if you don't have that and you don't have a broad view, you might cross paths with some very good options you're going to ignore because they're not exactly at your feet, that could have made your journey better and even replace bad options that you have in your arsenal. So always keep that in mind. As your muscles and your frame broadens, the spirit broadens with it. And that entails also being honest. Because some people have their ability, but they willingly choose to restrict their view. And that is because they are, again, lacking in a certain degree in terms of integrity. And Musashi tells you to not think dishonestly. He's not saying don't act dishonestly. That is a given. He's saying don't think dishonestly, because dishonest thoughts create dishonest actions, and they also create weak and mediocre men, because a man who is dishonest will find excuses, he will find reasons to explain why he's slowing down on the path, why he's not going anywhere, why he gives up. If you are honest with yourself, all of that goes away. You can't do that anymore. And the only thing left is objectivity. This book is probably one of the most objective books I've ever read in my life. You are reading from a man who has shed any semblance of subjectivity he might have, and it's, one, jarring, because in this world we're all super subjective, me included, but also refreshing. And he repeats again, the way is in training. And as I said, he says to train all the time, and that's a given, but the formulation of this one is interesting. The way is in training. The entirety of the way that I just said is impossibly large, is contained within that notion of training. Why? Well, because everything, every concept, every intellectual disposition, everything is contained in action, in the actual doing of the thing. And none of it is outside. It's all there, and actually the only purpose of all of that galaxy of thoughts and theories and principles only exists to be applied. If you don't apply it, it's for nothing, it's a waste of time, it's a waste of space in your brain. The way is in training. Training is not in the way. There are differences here. So the actual core of everything is the doing, not the thinking. The two are important, but the actualization of all of that energy that you spend thinking about things is in the doing of the thing. And that leads me directly to one of my favorite parts of the book, which is the water book. And I selected a few quotes that I want to share with you guys to close this video, because I find them incredibly applicable to us, to our lifting journey. The first one is, distinguish between gain and loss in worldly matters. Again, in the line of objectivity, how do you become objective? Well, the best way is to put words on things, to not just keep them as thoughts in terms of intellectualization, but to actually put them down and look at them again from an out-of-body perspective and name them for what they are. What happened? Is it a gain? Is it a loss? Okay, why did it happen? Can I go back? Can I do some detective work? All of that will lead you to dissecting your life and having a better understanding of things that matter, things that don't, things that are good, and things that are bad. If you just look at it plainly with your emotions still attached, it's going to be much more difficult. He also tells us to do nothing which is of no use. And that, as modern men, is probably the toughest advice, because we do so much that is of no use, me again included. You spend hours and hours wasting time on Instagram or jerking off on your computer, all of which is not only completely useless to your progression, but actually toxic, and you know it. That's the worst part. But if you actually looked at it in terms of worldly matter, you would be able to actually say, okay, this is bad. And that is the first step to stop doing the thing. And that also means that you're going to be able to also look at things and say, this is good. For example, watching TV for an hour with my family or with my dog or my wife or my husband. Okay, this is my recovery. I bound socially with someone. This is good. It doesn't mean that everything that is not lifting is bad, because again, keep in mind that most of what we do is not lifting, but lifting is the most important thing. And that interconnects. There are things in your life that you might think, well, it doesn't look to actually matter for lifting, so I should give it up. That might be a mistake. Think in terms of gains, in worldly terms. You might find that this thing is actually good. Those 20 minutes you spend just sitting down and reading a book, or even just looking through the window, that might be an important part of your background and your recovery. So it's important to your lifting, and because the way is in lifting, this is actually an application of the way. Musashi also warns us, again, the type of theoretical knowledge that has propagated itself throughout YouTube fitness and has led to people making no gains. Language does not extend to explaining the way. It can only be grasped intuitively. So, sort of counterintuitive, right? Because I'm making a video about the very topic of the way and the book of 5 rings. But what he means here is that you can read that book 1,000 times. If you don't actually put it into action, it's for nothing. And that I think I already explained perfectly. And this is also why sometimes people ask me, well, I know someone, or me myself, I'm someone who doesn't know anything about programming, but I ended up just learning it and applying it intuitively. How is it possible? Well, I'll tell you why it's possible. All of the knowledge on the books, in this channel, or everywhere on YouTube Fitness, it came from people who figured it out with their body, because the way is in training. After that, they took that knowledge and they put it into theoretical form for people to apply. But the original source of it was the training. It was never the knowledge or the book. And you must always be able to go back there and to realize that, because many people don't, they just read and then they think, well, I make no gains. You make no gains because you don't apply it. The book comes from the practice. It must return into the practice for the cycle and the circle to be completed. Because if you merely read this book, you will not reach the way. Plain and simple. Musashi was right there. Katana next to him with his little pen, with his little ink. He was writing this and was thinking, I can already see all of the DLs with their glasses and their pimples weighing 130 pounds, reading this book and thinking they're going to be summarized by the end of it. So he insisted on this, and he told us, hey, just because you read my book doesn't mean that you're hot shit. You must still apply it, okay? You must still train. And I believe, and it's something that I believe too, that he would have preferred people to simply not read his book at all and just train, because that's always better. The action is always more important. And in terms of the spirit that is going to go through and forth and actually fulfill that action, you must believe and understand that an elevated spirit is weak and a low spirit is weak. And we touched upon that already when I told you about the balance and approaching training with a certain mindset. The issue in both cases here is that the spirit is unstable. And the problem is that both a low and a high spirit are not sustainable. High because you're going to burn too much energy, low because you're going to enter a depression and eventually end up taking your own life, or life is going to devour you and you're going to become an empty husk. So none of them are sustainable. It doesn't mean that they're bad, but it means that if they are your state of choice when it comes to getting things done, you're not going to go anywhere. And you must accept and apprehend that thought first before you can actually apply it to your life. He also says, I'm keeping another thing for the last, actually no, let me say it now. It's something that shocked me the first time I read the book, because he gives a description of the proper posture to adopt in everyday life. I'm going to read it to you. Tell me if it reminds you of something. Lower both shoulders and without the buttocks jutting out, put strength into your legs from the knees to the tips of your toes. Brace your abdomen so that you do not bend at the hips. Picture this in your head. Shoulders back and down. Glutes tight. Abdomen braced. Legs braced. That's pretty much the perfect position to lift. That's how you're supposed to lift, to actually maintain the integrity of the entire body and put out as much power as possible. He figured it out thousands of years ago. And all of what he says is good, to keep the spine aligned, to not have a posterior pelvic tilt. All of it makes perfect sense. And it's no surprise, because as someone like him, I guarantee you that his understanding of the human body and the way it functions must have been so advanced that he could look at someone and say, okay, your posture is incorrect because of this. And to this day, it's still a thing. Most modern men, most people actually, in this modern environment, you look at them, you look at the way they move or they stand, and you're like, you shouldn't be alive. I don't know how you survive like this, but the only way I can surmise is that the environment around you is so crooked and so weak that you are allowed to be as weak, but it's not normal. And it's the reason why those people develop pathologies of the spine and knees, is because they just don't stand the way you're supposed to stand. You're supposed to stand using your muscles, not relying on the tendons and the structure. And that is something that, again, Musashi passed down onto us. And he also passed down his understanding of the gaze and the way to look at things. And what he had to say about it is that the gaze should be large and broad. This is the twofold gaze, perception and sight. Perception is strong and sight is weak. So if we go back to what I described to you in terms of small and big, okay, being able to expand your knowledge, this is in direct line with that. The way you look at things should be broad, but you should remain and retain the ability to have a focus, that is the sight. The sight is weak, but it's not something that you can do without. Because if the sight didn't exist, then the broad view wouldn't exist either. They're both sides of the same coin. Having that ability to flip from one another is what makes you more complete. And that is also what you should apply into your life and into your training. And as I say that, I close the water book, a water book that I hope you're going to explore yourself, to go into the philosophy of self-improvement. Because that's what I just preached to you pretty much, and that's what this book is. It's a book written by a guy who taught other men to improve themselves, not to fight with a sword. Most of the book has nothing to do with fighting with a sword. It's all about self-improvement, bettering yourself, and the way to do that, the methodology that is attached to that very idea. And all of it boils down to one thing: focusing on yourself and your actions. Something that YouTube Fitness has completely forgotten, and most people who teach also have forgotten. They constantly try to bring it back to them. It's them. It's about me. And maybe you can glance like a tiny bit of knowledge here and there, but since you're not really the main destination and the main recipient of what is being shared with you, it's so minimal that the carryover is almost nothing. Musashi in this book, keep in mind, he's a legend, he's a monster of a swordsman. He barely speaks about himself. When he does, it's always to actually relate it to you and say, oh, it happened like this for me, you should do it like this. It's the perfect way to teach, but it's also the perfect way to live your life. This is how you should think about self-improvement. It's called self-improvement. You are at the center of it. Anyone who is trying to remove you from the center and plug themselves in is dangerous, because they're trying to corrupt the very notion and the idea that you're trying to pursue. And if the Greeks, in the previous video that I put in the description, offered us an archetype of the hero, the samurai and Musashi at the forefront gave us the method to become one. Last time I spoke broadly about, figures of greatness, demigods, and what they represented to us. And they represented a lot, but there was never really any method. There was never really anything put in the book so that you could actually achieve it yourself. It was very theoretical and in a dream state, and it lacked practicability. It lacked applicability. And I believe that what I showed today is much more applicable to you, and that book is non-stop applicable things that you should actually do in your life. It's not morals, it's not parables or principles, it's like hardcore things where Musashi tells you, do this because of this. It's as simple as that, but I have found that this type of non-glamorous, straight to the point method is the best way. Because this is what self-improvement is. Self-improvement is not jumping through hoops and looking pretty and looking at yourself in the mirror with self-hypnosis. That doesn't work. What works is to put yourself at the center, claim your responsibility and agency, and then get to work. It's the only thing that functions. And if you can do it for 10, 20 years, you're going to get to a point where you're going to understand the way broadly, and you're going to realize, just like Musashi, that the way was indeed in training, and it was always in training all along. And it's something that he says very clearly, because he tells you that what you must do is to step by step walk the 1,000-mile road. It's a very long, strenuous journey, one that, again, in terms of power fantasy, was represented by the Greek ideal, and in terms of methodology is represented by the samurai. Both are very important, right? We need to have this inspiration to look at the end of the journey and the journey in itself when it comes to actual difficult tasks and obstacles. But we also have to develop an ability to look at numbers, to look at things that might not be as crazy inspiring at first, but that give us an idea of what was going on here, where the strings were being pulled and what it took. And what it took is very simple, and I'm going to read it for you right now. As I said, you must walk the 1,000-mile road, but more importantly, you must study strategy over the years and achieve the spirit of the warrior. Today is victory over yourself of yesterday. Tomorrow is your victory over lesser men. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.